The first time he saw her, she looked like she hadn't eaten in days, and yet she still tried to smile. Rain tapped softly against the diner window that morning, blurring the gray city outside into something distant and unreal. Inside, the air smelled of toasted bread and cheap coffee, and Daniel sat alone in his usual booth. Same time, same place, every morning. His son had just started school again after weeks of illness, and for the first time in months, Daniel found himself sitting with a quiet he didn't know how to handle. That's when she walked in. Her clothes were clean but worn, her shoes barely holding together, and her eyes carried a kind of exhaustion that couldn't be explained by just one bad night. She hesitated at the entrance, as if even stepping inside required permission she wasn't sure she had. The waitress gave her a polite but guarded look, the kind reserved for people who might not be able to pay, and yet she smiled. A fragile, trembling smile that felt like it might shatter if anyone looked too closely. Daniel didn't know why, but something in his chest tightened. If you believe in kindness, in small acts that can change someone's life, take a second right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Because stories like this remind us that even the smallest gestures matter more than we think. He watched her sit at the far corner table, clutching her hands together as if trying to keep them warm. She didn't order anything. She just sat there, staring at the menu without really reading it, her lips pressed together in quiet desperation. Daniel hesitated. He wasn't a rich man. Being a single father meant every rupee had a purpose, every expense a calculation. But he also knew what it felt like to struggle in silence, to pretend everything was okay when it wasn't. So he did something simple. He ordered an extra sandwich. When the plate arrived, he picked it up, walked over to her table, and gently set it down in front of her. He didn't ask questions. He didn't make a big deal out of it. He just gave a small nod, as if it was the most natural thing in the world, and returned to his seat. For a moment, she just stared at the sandwich. Then her eyes filled with tears. She tried to hide it, wiping her face quickly, but Daniel had already seen. He looked away, giving her dignity, pretending not to notice as she picked up the sandwich with trembling hands. That was the beginning. The next morning, she was there again. And again, Daniel ordered an extra sandwich. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. It became a quiet routine between them, no names, no conversations, just a simple exchange of kindness. She would arrive early, sit in the same corner, and he would place the sandwich on her table without a word. But slowly, things began to change. Her clothes became cleaner, her posture a little straighter. The sadness in her eyes didn't disappear, but it softened. And one morning, for the first time, she whispered a thank you. It was barely audible, like a secret shared with the wind, but Daniel heard it, and he smiled. Life, however, was not kind to Daniel. Bills piled up faster than he could manage. His son Noah needed medication that wasn't cheap, and the overtime shifts he picked up at work drained him to the bone. Some mornings, he barely had enough money for his own breakfast, let alone an extra sandwich. But he still bought it. Even when it meant skipping his own meal. Even when it meant going home hungry. Because somehow, in helping her, he felt less alone in his own struggles. He never told her that. He never told anyone. To the outside world, he was just a quiet man in a diner, eating breakfast alone. But to her, he was something more, a lifeline. A reminder that kindness still existed in a world that had given her every reason to believe otherwise. And then, one morning, everything changed. Daniel walked into the diner, already exhausted from a sleepless night, only to find her missing. Her table was empty. The corner felt strangely hollow without her presence, as if something important had been taken away. He waited. 10 minutes. 20. She didn't come. A strange unease settled in his chest. He didn't know her name, didn't know where she lived, didn't even know her story, and yet her absence felt heavier than it should have. He ordered only one sandwich that morning, and for the first time in months, he ate it alone. Days passed, then a week. She never returned. She never returned. Daniel told himself it didn't matter. People came and went all the time. Life moved on. But the truth was, something inside him felt incomplete, like a chapter of his life had ended without warning or closure. Then came the morning that would change everything. The diner door opened, and instead of her, 4 large men in black suits walked in. Behind them were 2 sharply dressed individuals carrying briefcases, their expressions cold and professional. They scanned the room like they were searching for someone, their presence drawing uneasy glances from everyone inside. Daniel looked down at his coffee, trying not to get involved. But then one of them approached his table. His heart skipped. They stopped in front of him, their eyes fixed, their posture rigid. For a moment, no one spoke. The tension in the air was suffocating, like the calm before a storm. Then one of the suited men placed a photograph on the table. It was her, Ida. Daniel's breath caught, the woman from the corner table, but she looked different, healthier, stronger, dressed in a way he had never seen before. He looked up, confused, and that's when they said something that made his world tilt. She had been searching for him. What Daniel didn't know was that the woman he had been helping wasn't just a struggling stranger. She had once lived a life far beyond anything he could imagine, a life of wealth, power, and influence. But everything had been taken from her in a brutal legal battle that left her with nothing but debts and betrayal. The days she spent in that diner were her lowest. And he had been the only person who treated her like she still mattered. Now, her case had been won. Everything that was taken from her had been returned, and more. But she hadn't forgotten. She couldn't, because in the darkest moment of her life, when she had nothing left to give, a stranger had given her everything without expecting anything in return. The lawyers explained that she wanted to meet him. Daniel hesitated. He didn't understand any of it. He wasn't part of her world. He didn't belong in whatever life she had returned to. But something inside him told him to go. So he did. What followed was something Daniel never expected. He was taken to a place that felt like another universe. Marble floors, towering glass walls, and a silence that carried the weight of wealth. And there she was, standing in the center of it all. The same woman, but not the same. She looked at him, and in that moment, all the distance between their worlds disappeared. Her eyes filled with tears, just like the first day he had seen her. And without hesitation, she walked toward him. There were no cameras, no audience, no grand speeches, just gratitude. Kind that couldn't be measured or repaid. She told him that the sandwiches had kept her alive during the days she had nothing, that his quiet kindness had given her the strength to keep going when she wanted to give up. And then she did something Daniel never saw coming. She handed him a file. Inside it was a job offer, a fully paid home for him and his son, and a fund set aside for Noah's medical care and education. It wasn't charity. It was her way of honoring the man who had changed her life without ever asking for anything. Daniel couldn't speak. He had spent so long struggling, surviving day by day, that the idea of relief felt unreal. But what moved him the most wasn't the offer. It was the realization that kindness had come full circle, that the small act he thought would disappear into the noise of the world had echoed louder than he ever imagined. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the power of kindness, take a moment to like, comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Before we reach the end, I want you to do something special. Comment the word of kindness below if you believe even the smallest act can change someone's life, because sometimes it can change everything. Daniel accepted the offer not for himself, but for his son, for a future that didn't involve constant worry and quiet sacrifices. But he never stopped going to that diner. And sometimes, when it rained, he would order an extra sandwich, not because he had to, but because somewhere out there someone might need it. And now he knew that even the smallest act of kindness could return in ways you could never predict. Not as a reward, but as a reminder that in a world often filled with silence and struggle, one simple gesture can become someone's reason to keep going. Daniel thought the story had ended there. He believed that life, after months of quiet struggle and sudden, overwhelming change, had finally given him a moment to breathe. The new home felt unreal at first, too clean, too still, too far removed from the chaos he had grown used to. When his son Noah ran through the rooms with a kind of laughter Daniel hadn't heard in a long time, touching walls as if they might disappear if he didn't. But peace, Daniel would soon learn, has its own weight. Because when life suddenly stops being about survival, you're left alone with everything you've been holding inside. The first few weeks passed in a blur of adjustments. Noah's health improved dramatically with proper care, his energy returning little by little The constant fear that had once lived in Daniel's chest, the fear of hospital bills, of not being enough, began to loosen its grip. And yet every morning at 7:30, Daniel still found himself sitting in that same diner, same booth, same window. Same rain tapping against the glass as if time itself refused to move forward in that small corner of the world. Only now, things were different. He no longer looked at the menu with calculations in his head. He no longer counted coins or worried about what he could afford. And yet when the waitress asked what he wanted, his answer never changed. 2 sandwiches, one for him, one for someone else. At first, no one came. The extra sandwich would sit there, untouched, growing cold as the minutes passed. The old Daniel would have eaten it, unwilling to waste even a single bite. But now he left it there until the waitress quietly took it away, day after day, until one morning, someone finally sat down. It wasn't her. Oh. It was a young boy, no older than 10, his clothes dirty, his face guarded in that same way Daniel remembered too well. He didn't ask for anything. He just stared at the sandwich, his eyes flickering between hunger and hesitation. Daniel didn't say a word. He simply nodded. And the boy understood. That moment hit Daniel harder than anything else had, because for the first time he realized something important. This wasn't just about one woman anymore. It was bigger than that. The kindness he had shown had not ended with her return. It had grown, expanded, and now it was something he could pass on, something he needed to pass on. But life, as always, had more to reveal. One evening, as Daniel was helping Noah with his homework, there was a knock at the door. When he opened it, he found her standing there again. Not surrounded by lawyers this time, not protected by bodyguards. Just her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she smiled, that same fragile, human smile he remembered from the diner, and stepped inside. There was something different in her eyes now. Not just strength, not just gratitude, but something heavier, something unresolved. They sat across from each other, much like they had in the diner, except now the silence carried a different kind of weight. And slowly, she began to share the part of the story Daniel had never known. Winning her case hadn't been the end. It had been the beginning of another battle. The people who had taken everything from her hadn't disappeared quietly. Power, she explained, doesn't give up easily. There were threats, pressures, and endless attempts to drag her back into the darkness she had fought so hard to escape. Money had returned. Control had not. She admitted that there were nights she still couldn't sleep. That despite everything she had regained, there was a part of her that still felt like the woman sitting in that diner, staring at a sandwich she didn't know if she deserved. And that was why she had come. Not as someone powerful, but as someone still healing. Daniel listened, his hands resting quietly on the table, his eyes steady. He didn't offer solutions. He didn't try to fix anything. Because he understood something most people didn't. Sometimes people don't need answers. They just need to not feel alone. In the weeks that followed, a new routine formed, but this time it wasn't silent. They began meeting regularly, sometimes at the diner, sometimes at the park, sometimes just sitting in quiet spaces where neither of them felt the need to pretend. Noah grew fond of her quickly, his laughter filling the spaces where silence once lived. And for the first time in a long time, she found herself laughing too, genuinely freely, without fear of what came next. But just as things began to feel stable, life shifted again. One morning, Daniel arrived at the diner to find a crowd gathered outside. Something was wrong. Police cars lined the street, lights flashing against the rain-soaked pavement. The familiar warmth of the diner felt distant, unreachable. His heart began to race. Pushing through the crowd, he caught fragments of conversation, words like incident, a threat, and a target. And then he heard her name. Everything inside him froze. What Daniel hadn't fully grasped was just how dangerous her world still was. The people she had fought against hadn't simply walked away. They had been waiting, watching, looking for a moment of weakness. And that morning, they had made their move. She wasn't hurt, but it was close. Too close. The realization hit Daniel like a wave crashing against everything he had built. This wasn't just her fight anymore. By being part of her life, by standing beside her, he and Noah were now part of something much bigger than they had ever imagined. Fear returned, not the quiet, familiar fear of bills and survival, but something sharper, something unpredictable. So, that night, Daniel sat alone in the living room long after Noah had gone to sleep. He stared at his hands, the same hands that had once simply carried a sandwich across a diner floor, and wondered how something so small had led to something so complicated. He had a choice. He could walk away. I return to a simpler life, protect his son by removing them from the danger entirely, or he could stay. Stand beside someone who had once been completely alone, just as he had been. The answer didn't come quickly, but when it did, it was simple. The next morning, Daniel went to see her. She was already there, sitting by the window the same way she used to, except now there was fear in her eyes she couldn't hide. When she saw him, she stood up immediately, her expression filled with something close to panic. Not for herself, for him, for Noah. She tried to tell him to leave, to stay away, to forget everything and go back to a life where he didn't have to carry this weight. But Daniel shook his head, because some things, once started, aren't meant to be abandoned. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. Because in that moment, they both understood something deeper than words. That kindness isn't just about giving when it's easy. It's about staying when it's hard. If this part of the story is touching your heart, take a moment to like, comment, and share. And don't forget to subscribe. Because stories like this remind us that real strength isn't loud. It's quietly choosing to stand by someone when it matters most. And before we continue, I want you to do something meaningful. Comment the word "stay" if you believe that true kindness means not walking away when things get difficult. Because that's where the real story begins. Daniel didn't walk away. He stayed. And in doing so, he didn't just change her life again. He changed his own. Because sometimes the greatest act of kindness isn't the first one. It's the one you choose to continue no matter what comes next.